But yeah, I do have questions. And again, I'm going to leave both of the pins in there. And so I'm not sure if it will show the question asking people. Hopefully it will, but let me go to Carl first, sir.
Great, thank you guys so much. That's so great to hear a voice of people in the scientific community talking about publishing research, talking about collecting data. It's I think the thing that's most needed right now. And so it has my mind just immediately going in terms of like types of research that could be conducted. Like, has anybody thought about the idea that UAP might in some way be leveraging properties of Earth itself, like the unique properties of the magnetic or gravitational field for maneuverability or propulsion? Has that ever been suggested or looked into?
Well, the propulsion, you know, well, you guys are have had a lot of people proposing propulsion stuff, but you know, the certainly gravity, you know, anti-gravity is you know, been talked about, but anti-gravity is really not a force; it's a curvature of space, which by matter. And there are in one of our projects, propulsion project, looking at you know, the equations, Einstein's theory of relativity, and 5D type analysis to that would generate, you know, a repulsive force that would support it and also propel it, you know, basically. And there's a lot of papers been written about different kinds of theories about warping space, you know, that these objects are using. And there's reason to believe that because like from the Nimitz report and others, they don't seem to be affected by the atmosphere. You know, any object moving at you know, hypervelocity or whatever would heat up and release energy because of conservation of energy. These things, it doesn't really happen. You get some light and reflections and those kind of things, but there's you know, there's no most of the actual physics papers that deal with this kind of stuff, the Alcubierre type of you know, effect requires negative mass, which is I mean, the equations support it, but negative mass is well, there's also sometimes positive mass, but the mass is kind of on the size of Jupiter. I mean, you know, well beyond anything that we'll be able to do in the near term. You know, this is an open subject and people are studying it, but there's not been any real papers that show a breakthrough that I know of anyhow. We have one of our physics, Eric Davis, physicist on there, has done a lot of work on this, and still it's you know, open to investigation, etc. But I mean, I do think that you know, there could be some kind of possibly using electromagnetic propulsion of some kind, and we're repelling the Earth's magnetic field, but then you get out into space, there's no magnetic field, so or at least it's very minor and it's not much to push against, you know, so there's still a lot of work ahead, and people that are interested in and have a proposal of those kind of things could work on a project in the SCU, but of course it's going to be peer reviewed. I mean, we don't publish anything unless it's been peer reviewed in detail, because you know, there's a saying, you know, by that skepticism is the chastity of the intellect. You know, it's like you have to just can't assume something. You have to examine it in detail and make sure that you know it passes muster by quite a few people, and that's how science progresses. You know, you move ahead a little bit at a time. There's nothing wrong with a theory that fails because it shows you what's not right. And that's knowledge too. You know, if it doesn't work, it shows you that that's not, and so nobody else has to go down that path, so that's kind of what I'm.
So if I can, let me interject that, Carl, I spent a lot of time looking into the Earth light phenomena, and of course there's a phenomena about an hour away from me here in Alabama that's been there since 1973. And in that phenomena, which is again separate from the disc shaped, the ones that have the structure to them, but you see a strong correlation with sometimes like a magnetic part of the Earth or something like that. In other words, let me clarify that we had the phenomena that's like a ball lightning, but it's not really that. You take a look at it through a spectral kind of like camera, and then you're able to break it into its constituent parts, and you find out that it's made of like hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. It's got like iron, sulfur, as well as even something like scandium or yttrium on the periodic table. And what's interesting about this is it's somehow able to be, confined in this ball-like thing which glows. And by the way, the glow tends to be not omnidirectional. It tends to be more like unidirectional. In other words, people on one side could see the object, and the other side can't. But what we found out was that it seemed to be, that in that area, for example, there was a preponderance of ponds that had sulfur leached into it. And so that might be like a chemical burp that's happening. But the odd part about it is that the balls of light, which will actually get an altitude of about 2,000 feet altitude, will fly in an east-west fashion or west to east, and that also, strangely enough, that they'll basically maybe last for 10 minutes or so or something of that nature, but they can fly against the wind. So if you think about like a ball of gas, if you would think that it would be propelled by the wind the same way that the wind direction was going. But yet these objects were going, completely against the wind. Or you might have, in the case of, and I studied lots of parts of the Earth that have the same phenomena, like, Piedmont, Missouri case that Dr. Harley Rutledge looked into and published in Project Identification. There were objects that would be at a standstill that would shoot up in the atmosphere at incredible rates of speed. I mean, I'm talking just like ballistics, that would shoot straight up. And the same thing happened in Brown Mountain lights, the same kind of like activity in Hestel in Norway, or you can go to Min Min lights in Australia. So, I just bring that up because that, whatever that is, we ought to be studying that as well. I mean, not just UFOs, but, scientists ought to get their arms around what these things are that are misidentified as UFOs a lot of times. And if we could separate them from the more machine-like, and say, okay, now let's take a look at the machine-like kind of candidates. And what do? Do they have like any kind of like aspects about, the Earth's performance, or is coronal mass ejections or solar activity coming into play? And so the biggest challenge to ufologists has always been able to get, let's say, let me get rid of the IFOs. And now let me focus on just the UFOs. And then what are the characteristics of just the UFOs, and to put them in like bins, if you would, to be able to study. And if they're all different kinds of propulsion systems engaged, then what is there a class of these things? Like, do all disks do this? Do all triangles do this? Do all other, types of things do this? And we might be able to learn something about those unique characteristics of those specific types of craft that might help us to get a better understanding of them. And hopefully that addresses where you're at.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
in my mind, I just think of a map and being able to correlate geography features and magnetic features to actual known sightings, locations, and trajectory movement. That would be fantastic data to look at someday, and I hope that you guys can be arbiters for that data. I would yield to the group, but thank you so much for your answer.
Yeah, I mean,
welcome,
understanding plasmas would have huge beneficial effects. I mean, we don't know how to create ball lightning. It's pretty much been it's been pretty much after a long period of criticism accepted as a real thing. But understanding like these things that Rich talked about, I mean, plasmas are extremely important in fusion research. Building these tokamak reactors. They're very difficult controlling the plasma, in order to get to a critical point, where you get fusion. And who knows, that might make tremendous breakthroughs in this, and so is very practical. But it's not being studied in any kind of detailed way that I know of.
Yep. Back to you, Tim.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you, Carl, as well. Let me go to Michael Boyd next. Michael?
Hello. So I'm curious regarding the nuclear context of the UAPs. Has there been any consideration of the scenario of nuclear war being the reason for curiosity vis-a-vis nuclear weapons installations? I found this video that I posted in the chat, and I can't show it now, but perhaps you can watch it later during the general discussion. But essentially, this video shows an interview of an entity, purportedly human, from thousands of years in the future, who's here searching in the past for lost evidence for who caused the nuclear war that nearly exterminates humanity. So I'd ask, later that you watch it, but as a general matter, has there been consideration of the possibility of the curiosity of UAPs around these nuclear installations might have to do with a nuclear war scenario in our immediate future?
I could.
Well, that's a very popular science. That's a very popular viewpoint for many people, that nuclear war, is the reason that they're here visiting. If the extraterrestrial hypothesis is correct, and visiting nuclear sites. And there's been a lot of science fiction stories written about this. People from the future, but as far as we know, currently,
he's not an alien. He's a human. That's an evolved human. He's a different species because he can't mate with us anymore, which that's the definition of difference in species. You can't reproduce. So.
Okay, I'm glad he's not out to mate.
So he's not from a different planet, and he also states that time travel and space travel are the same thing.
I know.
Well, bring the evidence. Bring us some evidence.
Looks pretty much like an alien to me, and also it's interesting because there's later.
Well, we'd like to interview him. And
there's later videos where apparently this is guys being tortured by us, and he didn't want to expose this information because he's worried about changing the future, and perhaps our showing of it will do that.
Yeah, I've seen those kind of videos before. Again, anybody can make a video, and it's like a little bit challenging to go through those things. But in fact,
check it out. Just have an open mind. I can't authenticate it, obviously.
Well, okay. That's been our problem too, because let me tell you, I mean, everybody and their brother's got a video out there, and the videos are all over. And now with the ability to be able to use your own computer to be able to create CGI and every other kind of thing that's imaginable, like you can make your own science fiction show. And now my cell phone, I mean, my God, you look at the iPhone 13 that they're coming out. Now I could do cinematography. I could have an alien, with all kinds of cinematography.
Perhaps we could do a FOIA request to ask the military if this is real, and maybe they would say yes, like they did with the FLIR 1 video. So I mean, it's up to discussion. That's all.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you, Michael. Let me go to Jacob Helvey next. Jacob has been patiently waiting. Sir?
Hey, how's it going? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so regarding this whole UAP storyline, so this whole thing comes out of the Pacific Coast, my understanding, with the Navy pilot reports and the gimbal videos. So I'm just asking, if you guys can speculate on maybe why or why not this location may be important. It doesn't seem like we have input from other areas of the globe, or maybe we do, I just don't know.
Yeah,
But,
well, let me straighten you out on that. I've been in this for 57 years, and it goes back further than that. So there's not a part of the planet that hasn't had a UFO report or haven't had incredible UFO experience. They've touched every part of the globe. Every country on the planet's been engaged in them, and the United States has no, hold on the UFO subject at all. It's because there's a lot of people here. So, I mean, let me clarify that up front. You're only hearing about, these Navy cases, which happens to be naval exercises. And if you take a look, even that, you get off the Pacific coast as well as the Atlantic coast that you're having cases. So in 2004, where Peter studied that one, that was down, near Catalina Island or off the coast of the West Coast of the United States. But then you take a look at the 2015 videos that came out, which were the Go Fast and the Gimbal. That was in the USS Roosevelt area. That was over off the Atlantic coast, just off that seaboard, if you would. Let me clarify that every country on the planet's had it, and all militaries have engaged in their own UFO investigations and studies, and they've all had military encounters. So hopefully that clarifies that. But more importantly, you're asking like, well, why is it that we're suddenly getting these?
I guess like why now? Yeah. So why now?
Well, primarily you have to look at the fact that this release of the information by ATIP, that they were studying it. ATIP was basically in the Pentagon that came out in 2017. We got an awareness that they were looking at the Department of Defense cases. And so the Department of Defense includes Air Force, Navy, and everybody else. And so they began looking at those cases, and those are the cases that they're focused on, not on the public cases, but looking at military cases. So that's why you're hearing a lot of release of information. And now there's a reporting channel that's being put in place so that they can report military cases to the UAP task force. And so there will be more, and it'll be military cases. But it goes beyond military cases.
Okay.
Yeah, I just second that. In Europe and stuff, it's not as difficult. The French especially have official groups that study these things, and they had their own encounters in England and Belgium and and South America. These all things, but in the United States has been special because it's not coming out. It isn't just in the United States. You were in trouble if you came out with this stuff. Like I talked, there's a real stigma and really dangerous for pilots, for people to talk about it. Their careers can be affected. The dumbbell case we talked about is by a physicist. He has many patents, and he was out hunting, and he could lose government contracts. If he comes out public and identifies this, so he remains anonymous. There's a real problem, and that's why the ATIP thing is so important. It's finally breaking down some of these barriers in the United States, and now you're hearing about them. This stuff has been around a long time. Go back to World War II. Those Foo Fighters. When they were, the Germans thought they were our secret weapon, and the Allies thought it was German secret weapons, and it was neither. And these things would go alongside the planes. They may be, some kind of plasma effect. I don't know, but maybe it's just difficult to know. So
I guess what the point is, what I'm trying to get at is, this story came out in 2017, is my understanding, and so is it just a conditioning of the public? Is it just like what are they getting at here? Because I think we all understand that this has been around since World War II at the very minimum. So do they think that the population is ready for this? What's the understanding here? What am I not getting?
Well, I guess, when you say conditioning, it sounds like that there's some sort of a big plan in foot to be able to do something, to make some sort of an announcement, when it's nothing more than just the fact that you've got an awareness that there was a project that happened to be secret, that was looking at from a standpoint of a threat that we didn't understand, when you don't know what the intent is, and you don't understand the capability, in the DoD language, that's a threat. Okay, so if you've got objects around our military locations, and you suddenly have these, ships that are being, have objects that are doing something that's rather unorthodox, and you can't identify where their source is, then you're going to look into it as a military. And so all that is that basically the word got out that secret project existed. And suddenly now you've got a whole lot of attention by the world's media on that. When, as Peter pointed out, you can go to South America. The Chilean government has had a long-term standing in studying the phenomena. You also have Argentine government that's been engaged, Brazilian government. You've got and a whole lot of other governments that are also equally engaged, but you don't hear about much from them. But you do hear about when something the United States says.
See, I'm in the U.S., so I definitely would very much like to hear that other side of the story regarding other countries, and I don't get that story.
Yeah. No,
it's pretty easy to just Google it. You'll see.
Well,
I mean,
that's Google. They can say what they want, or
anyway,
not say what they want. But
just to share with you that organizations are now forming around the globe, and so there is a world connectivity engagement that's going on, and I'm personally excited about it, because that means we do get to learn about world. The world's perspective on the subject.
I would love to hear that story for sure.
Yeah. So hang tight. We'll get to hear it.
Yeah. And Jacob, and thank you. If I could interject really quickly, gentlemen. So this story just came out in the last few days. The House NDAA includes permanent UFO studying office within the Pentagon. That's kind of an emerging story. And I'm wondering, again, from your perspective, again, having expertise in this field, having created kind of a scientific organization in this field, what are your thoughts on this potential? Because the bill hasn't been passed yet, right? But there's the possibility that there may be some kind of a permanent UFO studying office within the government. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think
it's already been going on.
Yeah.
So
that's what the DIA. That's what that report was. To set up basically a permanent organization to do this.
So I work in the DoD, right? And so bottom line is that where they're trying to figure out is, where do I position a fully functioning how do I position an office that's going to now go beyond the DoD? Because think about it. You might have NOAA weather radar that might help out. You have NASA. It's not necessarily a military organization, right? So they're starting to be able to look at all the intelligence communities, and how do I bring the intelligence communities together so I can get information from the FBI, I can get it from all the other agencies out there, and get them coordinated to be able to funnel it to a properly, positioned and authorized entity in the government to be able to work with all those other agencies to get them to share their information and bring it together, right? So that's what they're attempting to do with the NDAA. They also had that last year in the Intelligence Authorization Act, and they've been working to get it in the National Defense Authorization Act to get this whole thing engaged and set up. So now you've got, the Department of Defense is getting fully engaged and getting their organizations to now align and report up. Okay, the intelligence community will have to do the same thing. And you've got like NASA that's engaged in a study into the UAP phenomena now. So that information will be brought up. They'll have to fuse all the data, bring it together, and be able to start to effectively study it. And so that's what you're seeing, is that the US government is finally getting engaged, as they should have, as opposed to in Project Blue Book, it being a small office out of the Air Material Command in Dayton, Ohio, and it was run by a major, for God's sakes. It's just and all they could do was to collect information from the citizens, and oh, by the way, they mold off all the good intelligent military cases to be made them classified, and they weren't even part of the Project Blue Book.
Wonderful, thank you. Let me go to Mark Sokol next. Mark?
Yes, yeah. You guys were talking about the observables, but have you noticed the non-observables, like the things that UFOs can't do? There's, I think those are more important sometimes than the visibles. Like they can't do a barrel roll, and they can't seem to stay still.
Well, when you say stay still, what do you mean? I mean, they can, they do hover, and
They do
lay
hover,
on
but
the
they're
ground.
wobbling. They're not like perfectly still.
Well,
They're
not
always-
Not all of them.
No,
Some
not
of them
all of them.
hover fine. Yeah.
Some of them
Yeah,
hover
and-
without moving.
Yes, in
Yeah.
fact, you know, going back to the early days with discs, you always had what they call a falling leaf kind of an effect when they were like trying to hang in the air. That's gone away, and now what you're doing is you're seeing even a triangle shaped object which can remain positioned.
Oh,
In
so
one
are
spot.
the triangles staying still and the circular ones are wobbling?
Well,
Or-
again, the phantom leaf or the falling leaf kind of an effect hasn't been seen in a long time or not reported by a lot of people. And so I don't know if that's a different kind of phenomenon now, or whether that's they've advanced or something like that and they're better able to do it. But we don't get that report of then, just the same as we don't get a lot of cars being impacted by electromagnetic effects when the object's around, where we used to have that back in the 60s and 70s and stuff like that. So there's been some changes, but you can have an object that can remain in the air and seemingly not show any of that falling leaf kind of thing.
Also, have we seen any UFOs that can do a barrel roll?
No, not a barrel roll. I mean, and basically what you might have an object that stands still and then it shoots upward. It could shoot at an angle. It could shoot straight across. We've got objects that can actually disappear right in the same spot and they not do anything. And so you have a whole host of those kind of reports that are going on, with all those unique characteristics about them. But none that I've ever heard of that did barrel rolls per se.
Like an F-16 can do, yeah. There's a theory that I brought up here a couple of times that explains why they can't do a barrel roll. It has to do with inertial.
They can do anything. There's no limitations on some of them. It's
my
widely verified. I mean, there's widely different cases. I mean, the technologies actually appear to be different. Like it's not just one phenomena. So
Can they make me a peanut butter jelly sandwich? Like, is there any limit?
I don't know. Maybe they make deliveries. You never know. You'd have to.
I think Mark is trying to. I think what he's trying to do is fit some of the propulsion stuff into kind of a bucket, right? Where you're being, but the diversity does seem like the diversity of reported shapes and sizes and propulsion configurations and all of that. And that's caused me a lot of confusion as well. And then there's other, and I should apologize for jumping in, but there does seem like this dichotomy, and I know that you gentlemen, especially Rich, you guys probably both feel this as well, where we've almost created this this bifurcation, right? Where you have the Navy incidents from 2004 to present, and now we're kind of looking at those as kind of it's almost like the official story or the party line, whereas we also have reputable sightings going back to the mid 1940s, and something Mark has talked about in the past is, I mean, we have stuff going back to like biblical times that may or may not fit the bill. So, in a sense, I think that this new era of openness has also become more confusing in some ways.
Well, and in addition to that, it's our understanding of these it's generational. You have a lot of new people, young people that are now getting the word about it, and they didn't hear about the cases I heard back in the 65 and in 64 when I got started, right? So I mean, I heard a holistically different kind of a thing, and I was talking to all these witnesses who had saw these things, and what I'm trying to tell you is that, I mean, the reports back then tended to always be that they weren't Tic Tacs, that they were tended to be more like the disc-shaped flying saucer kind of version, right? So that's what people were tending to report, that they saw disc-shaped objects that were moving around, and so, but now what you got is, of course, you got the, younger people hearing about just now the Tic Tacs and all the wonderful things that are coming up with the Navy, and they're focusing on that. And suddenly that's their only understanding of the phenomena. And now that's their whole world view of that. but wait a minute, you know, you need to go back in some of the books that have been written and actually read about those cases to find out about the variations of shapes and the variations of sizes and the variations of the way that these things maneuver around. And they're just not getting all those, you know, that piece of information, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Is there going to be any in-person conferences from the SCU anytime soon?
Yeah, we announced that you might not have been on at the time, but this coming next June, the first weekend in June, we're going to be holding the SCU conference again. It'll be a hybrid. It'll be in person as well as live streamed. This year we only could have a live stream because of COVID, but it'll be here in Huntsville, Alabama again, and we'll on our website, which is explorescu.org, we'll announce it. But look for the first weekend in June.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're happy to help you guys promote that as well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
We're right now in the process of, like, you know, trying to identify all the key speakers we want to be able to get. You know, having conversations with people like Avi Loeb, Michio Keku, and a whole bunch of others. So we're excited.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, let me see who is next on our list. And again, I can't thank you gentlemen enough for joining us today. It's absolutely wonderful. Mr. Solomon, go ahead, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, yeah, I can hear you now.
The question I had was, how do you, CSU, position or compare yourself to the STARS Academy? Because I noticed that you have two common people, Hal Puthoff and Davis. I forget his last name, first name.
Eric Davis.
Eric Davis, yeah.
Yeah. So when you say, how do we compare? Well, we're a different organization. And by the way, To the Stars Academy is now, in other words, they lost Lou Elizondo and Chris Mullen, who have decided to depart from them because they were turning more into, they want to be an entertainment organization. And that's where the focus of Tom DeLonge really was all along. But the point is that we don't compare with them at all. And we don't even compare ourselves to MUFON, or we don't compare ourselves to other organizations. We're strictly think of us as more like a think tank, where we're actually looking into and applying science to the study of maybe very compelling cases. We want to look at the more compelling cases and really spend a lot of time looking into them, and also doing scientific studies around the whole phenomenon. They're not doing that in TTSU or TTSA, excuse me.
Okay, and so what is the purpose of your scientific studies? To validate that this UAP phenomena is real, or to extract some kind of engineering hypothesis or something more?
Well, I think we kind of covered that. We're trying to get the scientific community to take this seriously and then investigate, make this a valid subject for scientists without any threat to be able to study it by proving these things are real. And that's,
Yeah,
that's the point.
Benjamin, if I could jump in real quick, I think I think probably the major distinction would be that the SCU is really digging in to the science, and they're trying to validate the science, as rigorously as possible. And then the TTSA is probably more geared towards promoting, building interest in this area in general. But not necessarily exploring it rigorously. So they would be more entertainment and promotion,
So CSU would make it credible?
Yeah, they're doing lots of scientific papers, lots of studies, very detailed.
To
And
physicists, engineers to take it off from that.
Yeah, and Benjamin, by the way, we're not CSU, we're SCU.
SCU.
That's okay. I just want to clarify that. So we're the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies.
I used to live in Colorado, so I keep switching the.
No problem.
Yeah, well, and again, the website is explorescu.org, and so and I put that into chat, but it's explorescu.org. So I would urge everyone to at least visit or visit again, and there are conferences and events and YouTube videos and all sorts of information that these gentlemen have put up. So,
Okay, great. Thank you.
let me see. Let me go back to Carl. Carl, go ahead, sir. Oops, sorry. Oh, Carl, I hit the mute. That's my fault.
No problem.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. So I, two different questions, because I'm really curious about Aguadilla, but before we leave the science topics, one of the things that I find is difficult when applying for research grants is the resources for statistical analysis of experimental results. And quite often that it can be helpful having collaborators when we potentially apply for grants that can provide that kind of assistance for validating results in terms of scientific credibility. Is that something you guys could potentially collaborate with?
Yes, yeah. I mean, we're a think tank for analysis of UAPs. I mean, we need data.
Well, yeah, the idea being that through experiments that we might conduct, the validation of that data could be an outside organization accredited like you all, and then published as a collaborative effort for the advancements of the topic.
Sure.
Yep.
Fantastic.
We're and by the way, there's a Phil Bouchard, I guess, who wrote something here on the chat. So, basically, he was mentioning scientists will not go against the mainstream because they're risking their reputation, job, and grants. It's very simple. Let me clarify to you that whole paradigm and stigma is changing, because now they're suddenly, with the advent of the UAP task force and the fact that the government is basically, at least in the United States, announcing that they're real. What I've seen is that paradigm is radically changing. In fact, we have universities that are actually looking for people like ourselves to actually construct courses to be able to teach the subject of UFOs and UAPs. So it's not always true. We have universities that are out there doing it, and we have scientists that are in the academia that are doing it. And we have people that we've worked with, even in the Aguadilla case. Well, we went over to the University of Alabama, Huntsville, took the video over there, worked with the applied optical department, and basically had them look at that and give us some feedback. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's not necessarily true that that all scientists will not go against the mainstream. They're starting to do that. That's why you're starting to see a lot more conferences that are being, that this is being discussed in openly, and even a part of. Peter talked with the AIAA, and we had others, Ted Rowe that spoke there. We had, and so I guess what I'm trying to say is that paradigm is suddenly changing, and I'm thrilled, because I've been waiting for this since the very beginning in my Blue Book days and stuff like that. So
yeah, it's a definite defrosting of the iceberg. It's starting to change, but it is still at a very early stage.
Yeah.
Now, if I could ask, does it seem as if the news cycle is in a bit of a lull regarding UFOs? Perhaps it's just my perception, but this is something that I've tended to follow, and the impression that I've had has been that things built up to almost a fever pitch right around that June-July period, where it was like everyday news stories, and everyone's talking about UFOs all the time, and they came out with a report, and my interpretation of it, people interpret it different ways. I interpreted that as saying, yeah, UFOs are real. And I was like, wow, this is a tremendous revelation. And then I almost had this feeling like, and what next? I don't know. Would you guys echo that based on your experience?
Well, the news cycle, they have to have something new all the time. And, it changes, the public interest, has a very short memory. So you can't, unless you have something new, that people lose interest in it. So, now we have, the latest thing that will last about a week or 2 weeks, and then are on to something else. Nothing. That's why we're not trying to engage the general public too much, because there's plenty of that already. I mean, you know, in the entertainment industry and all those kind of things. I read some statistics that a third of the people in the United States already believe in UFOs. So there's no need to convince anybody that they exist. I mean, I mean, you're just, you know, it's kind of like a religion or something. But we're trying to get a different group, get scientists to actually get into and figure out what this stuff really is. You know,
Right. Yeah,
and that's the case.
I used to hold like monthly meetings here in Huntsville, Alabama, and I would get like, you know, 40 people that would be coming all the time. And, you know, I would try to encourage, you know, the scientific study and getting them engaged in study. Well, you know, you'd think that that would work, but they were all there for entertainment. So I stopped the meetings. You know, it's a waste of my time. You know, I want to spend it talking to scientists and scientific-minded, rational people that really want to do something with this and study it. And that's where I want to engage. And that's even what, you know, Hynek was trying to do way back in the day in Project Blue Book. You know, he was trying to engage science. So is Jacques Vallée and some of the other key people in this phenomena. They were, in fact, there was a book called The Invisible College, because it was all of the academia that Peter was mentioning, for example, that didn't want to come out of the closet to talk about that they had an interest in the subject of UAPs. Well, that's changing. Now they don't have to hang in the closet. They can, I mean, when I went over to UAH, this one dude had his entire office set up with UFO paraphernalia. You know, I'm going like, okay, that's good. And by the way, if you go look at where I'm at Army Material Command, I got the same thing set up, and suddenly everybody's in the hall talking in the military now about UAPs. You know, so there's a whole, you know, attitude change again that's been it's happened since we had the 2017 announcement, and suddenly they're saying, oh my God, really? There was a serious project going on, and there were these videos and stuff like that. So the conversation's back on the table is what I'm trying to say. And it's a great thing that's happening. So we're collaborating. You know, trying to connect up all the dots, trying to get other countries engaged, and it's wonderful.
Now, also, if I understand correctly, there are a lot of peripheral organizations as well. Like one of the ones that comes to mind is UAPx, and that's UAP Expeditions. I believe that's Christopher Altman's. That's associated with the SCU, but it's not the same organization, right? If I understand that correctly.
No, it's not.
It's not
Right.
the same. And a lot of organizations set up with a particular focus. And in that case, what you had, and then Peter mentioned that earlier, that Kevin Day was the one that set it up, working with, you know, Gary Voorhees and all the guys that were aboard the Nimitz case. And then they started adding other people. In fact, I'm listed as being still a consultant with them myself, right? So, I mean, you know, bottom line is we were all trying to help them, but their focus at the time was to be able to go over and do basically a technology study using technology tools and be on a boat and go out there in the water and to go up and down the coastline and see if they could capture any kind of like data that they would that would help them to understand the UAP question. So it's called UAP Expedition for that reason, because they were doing that, right? And all we did was we said, you know, hey, look, if you guys get data, you know, you can bring it to SCU, and we'll be glad to take and do some analysis work and help you to publish a paper and, you know, get that out, and we can do that. So that's why we partnered with them. We're not looking to be a UAPx, but we are looking to be able to work with them. And if they do get data, then great, we'll happily engage the study of it, right?
Yeah. Well, and then, you know, one other thing that I'd always wondered about was, and I'm sure this is something you guys have considered as well, but like applying modern data analysis principles to old data. And one of the examples that I'd wondered about was the National UFO Reporting Center, Peter Davenport over in Spokane, I believe. I mean, in fact, he has this database online with tens of thousands of reports. You know, have you guys looked at different ways to use modern data analysis, I guess, on this incredible historical legacy data that's been collected?
Well, you know, I think that Rich went over that on some of the projects. We have the Intentions Project and the that actually is doing statistical analysis based on, and the characterization project. Characterization project was taking a lot of these databases and filtering them, for validity, and then sending those off like to the intentions project, which is looking at the possibility that there's more interest in, statistically more interest in nuclear sites or military bases than say somewhere else. And so, yeah, we're actually doing this. And again, takes a long time. It's a lot of work, and
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of other kinds of attempts at being able to pull separate databases together and to be able to make sure you cleanse them, to be able to get rid of, you do data cleansing and stuff like that. And then once you get that, you could apply AI learning or machine learning and AI tools to be able to help you out. Robert had looked into a tool that we were using actually in MUFON that we were trying to propose, that he's been able to apply, and he did a presentation on that at the conference this year. But basically, it's a way for you to call out and look for specific things that you have an interest in from the data set that you have, right? And so that you could pull that out. And in fact, what you have even with NUFORC, anybody that sees a light in the sky is free to go and report that to NUFORC. The question is, what was the light in the sky? And how do you call? And it might have been just an airplane. Okay, so how do you weed out the airplanes and the fireballs and all of the other stuff that's up there that are IFOs, to be able to get down to the UFOs that we talked about, right? That you really want to study, right? And so what the tool that he was working with was able to do was actually able to sort out all the IFOs and the kind of the clutter that might be out there to get to cases that you'd really want to spend some time looking at. And so you found out in statistically looking at the United States, well, it matched the population centers of every city, So a larger city is going to have a larger number of cases that are in the database, right? And you can just readily see that. So you're not going to get anything that's really, really important to come for. As a state director with MUFON, would be like looking to see if there were any inherent patterns about the state of Alabama. And I was also the state director for Mississippi. And I was trying to find out whether there's certain areas or certain kinds of things, is there anything about the land, the physics, if you would, of the land, I'm not the geology, if you would, or whatever, that might be an attractor. Were there any military bases that these things were at, that type of thing? And it was hard. I was hard pressed to be able to find cases that would match that, except that, guess what? I would hear about a triangle, and then I found out that there's a B-1 bomber out in Birmingham. And so suddenly I would get a whole lot of triangle cases, right? Or let me give another example. Down in Mobile, off the Gulf Coast, is a naval exercise or an exercise area. So what happens is I would get these people that are down there for a vacation reporting the fact that they were in Gulf Shores, Alabama, and they were seeing all these orbs shooting around and doing all kinds of stuff. Well, guess what it was? It was about the fact that you have a air sea rescue school that's down in Mobile, and they're actually sending out helicopters and they're shooting off illumination flares. And the flares would come down and then they would shoot off in different directions again. And so suddenly people were reporting orbs, right? So again, you have to look at that in the context of that being a part of the data set that you're now wanting to eliminate, to be able to get down to look at the specific cases that are actually UFOs that you're interested in, right? And the problem is, even with the NUFORC data set, NUFORC doesn't investigate cases. So it's not a filtering out of anything. It just takes all raw data, right? And you have the same thing with MUFON from their public site. But when you're in MUFON, you actually see the case investigations that went on, and you could, you could tell that was actually an IFO, not a UFO. But if you're not in MUFON, then you don't get to see that data, has been scrubbed or that they've made a determination. And now you're looking at that data, trying to determine intelligence about it, and it's hard to do.
Yeah, from a skeptical point of view, why would you get more reports around a military base than you would around somewhere else. Well, the first thing, there's usually security, and people are, going to report it. But some farmer in Bulgaria, has a sighting, will probably never it'll never become public. So statistically, there's an unbalance there, and same with nuclear sites and, all these kind of things. You have to be very careful about having a random selections. You have to have a control, you need to have a control group and that a random, because with statistics, the sampling is the whole thing, sampling properly so that the data is random is very important. Otherwise, it's biased. And that's where the difficulty comes in. Many of these old reports and stuff, there's very little really specific information you can really use very much, and makes it very difficult. But that's the challenge we face.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's an excellent point. And I'd noticed that with Peter Davenport's data as well, is that a lot of it is vague enough that it's difficult to make heads or tails of. So
Let me also inject one thing with you, and that is that after doing like maybe several hundreds and hundreds of UFO lectures, during my UFO lectures over my 57 years, I've been in a variety of groups. In fact, I even gave a UFO presentation to the people at Foreign Technology Division at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base on the subject of UFOs that they were actually supposed to be studying. But anyway, the point that I'm trying to get at is that I would always ask a simple question: how many in the room have actually seen one, right? And you get a whole bunch of hands, and then you'd ask the question, well, how many have you reported? You don't get a hand went up. So largely, maybe one person in the room, but that's about it. And nobody reports these things. And so even all those like lights I'm talking about an hour away, those spook lights, if you would, those earth lights, nobody's reporting those things. And so consequently, the greatest amount of UFO reports are never reported. So you're not really getting an accurate picture. And then there's also what they call the strangeness index. And that is, the stranger the story, the less likely that I'm going to actually report it to anybody or talk about it. And so, guess what? We're missing out on maybe cases that might be more revealing to us because it is strange and the phenomenon is strange, that we're not getting. And all we're getting are people seeing lights in the sky because I feel safe about reporting a light in the sky because you won't call me a kook. Everybody can see those.
yeah.
Right. So that's the problem. You take a look at it, like, the Air Force Project Blue Book only got something like 12,000 cases out of its history, from 1952 to 1969. Guess what? Who's going to call the government to report their sighting? They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't know how to get a hold of them. And that's what I get most often, is most people don't know how or why would I report. And especially if you're talking about rural areas, my God, they barely have internet. They don't even know to go up to a site. They don't read anything. I'm busy out there picking up my corn. And so guess what? I'm not going to tell anybody.
Absolutely. Let me go to, and we're pushing close to our time.
Yeah.
Let me go to Michael Boyd next. Michael?
I had a couple questions about the Nimitz Tic Tac incident. One of the things I'm curious about is I heard that initially in the encounter that they observed some water disturbances below the Tic Tac, and I'm curious about what your thoughts are on the relationship between UAPs and USOs. And there was another recently declassified video of another incident where it's like a ball that's descending into the water, and again it appears to be some relationship between something aquatic and the aerial phenomenon that's being observed. So I'm curious, and my question, it's in the context of there's always a leaning towards some alien presence that's accounting for this technology without really examining the aquatic civilization possibility because of the fact that most of our Earth is covered with water. I'm just curious, which do you think is more probable? The aquatic or the extraterrestrial?
Well, when we did our report, many of these pilots hadn't come out yet public. And recently, a lot of information has come out. And I saw one interview with David Fravor, who mentioned that the whitewater was actually following the UAP as it went over the surface. My interpretation of this is it's part of the drive mechanism affects the water below. Our research found no indication of any kind of a submarine or any kind of anything under the water that was involved with this. So, and plus Tic Tac, they're rare. I mean, they're all different. All these things are all different. They're not all Tic Tacs. And in fact, I don't know if too many, if there might be one other one that was reported, but unless you have data, you can't really tell. But USOs have been around for a long time, and we have a project studying these things that come out of the water and go into the atmosphere, fly around, and they seem to be a similar object. Now, what, of course, the mind, reels at this stuff. That the UAP hypothesis or the extraterrestrial hypothesis. There's lots of science fiction stories about, and movies about that. I'm trying to think of the one famous movies, about the underwater aliens that are under there. So we have no facts about this. To say something about it would be disingenuous. We don't really have data to support it. So that's about all we can say.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
I had this. Oh, sorry, Rich. You were going to.
No, I just want to inject that there's so many different hypotheses about the objects, whether they're ET, and I think I tried to point out, or whether they've got a base underneath the ocean. Your point's accurate. We shouldn't have called the planet. It shouldn't be the planet Earth. It should be the planet water. I mean, But bottom line is that there is a preponderance of these cases where objects are transmedia and they go into the water, come out of the water. What are they doing in the water? And there all those USO cases I talked about that exist where people see them underneath water. So obviously that's a medium that they could still work in. Whether they've got a base there that they're using or what, we don't know. Nobody's found anything yet. Whether they're coming from outer space and coming in. It's not like astronomers see them popping from, whatever planet, and there they are. And then you have objects that, suddenly are there one minute, next minute they like dissolve into nothing and they're gone, and so are those what you consider interdimensional? And then you got the object like the Bentwaters case in Rendlesham, England in 1980, where allegedly James Penniston went and touched it. And basically got zapped up with some sort of like light and everything else. Next thing you know, he writes ones and zeros. And when you interpret, he figures out what those are a while later, it's binary code. And it turns out to be something saying that it was a surveillance vehicle from the future.
Yeah.
And so now you're talking about time travel, right? So, I mean, you get what I'm saying. It's like there's all these different things, and it's like a potpourri of all these different kinds of craft. And there's maybe not one hypothesis that will work. It might be multiple. And so that's the tough part about this whole thing, right?
Fair enough. So my final question is related to the Nimitz incidents again. And Mr. Fravor reported that at one point that the Tic Tac disappeared. And then later when he was at the rendezvous point, it reappeared. And so the question is how it raises two possibilities. One, that the Tic Tac could read his mind. And the other is that it was ours. The Tic Tac was ours, and the Air Force was putting one over the Navy.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, when we look at the physics of this thing, first off, there's no materials that we know of that can withstand the forces that were experienced. There's no kind of propulsion systems you have ever seen that are developed that are doing anything
Well,
like that.
that may be true, but my daddy worked at the Skunk Works.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm sorry, but even the people, in the Skunk Works, I mean, unless we've come up and you take a look at the physics and how these things are moving at like Mach 60, or that they're withstanding 5,000 Gs or something like that. Even at the Skunk Works, I mean, the material science hasn't developed to the point where you can do this in an object.
I would
Well-
respectfully disagree. There's lots of us, people like Hal Puthoff, that think that space-time can be engineered in a way such that this is possible.
Well, let me also tell you that Hal Puthoff and I are good friends. He's a part of us, and we've been talking. And his basically context is that these are definitely that they're objects that are intelligently controlled, that they're machines, that we don't know where they're coming from, and that it could, ultimately that they could be doing all kinds of things. And for us to even figure out right now where any of these things are coming from, we're going to be hard pressed to do that.
And
Yeah, and I'll
gentlemen,
say one last thing is that science doesn't, I mean, the idea that there's there's a lab somewhere that's producing something 1,000 years in advance of us is pretty ridiculous. I mean, I'm an engineer. I've studied technology. Plus, this was 2004. We haven't seen any major advances like this since 2004. And things don't, there's always prior research that indicates, all major advances in science had precursors of like transistor, when they developed transistor, there was a lot of it was development in quantum theory that sort of got up to where the p-n junction was possible. And that's true of lasers. There was a maser before that, and before that, the klystron tubes and these kind of things, that gave the underlying physics. There's people that believe that Velcro came from outer space or some damn thing, and there's a patent for it in Switzerland, So you have to, you can have an open mind, but it's better to be skeptical, because if your mind's too open, your brain will fall out. And that's an old saying by Einstein. So I'll let it at that.
but and gentlemen, thank you both very much. Let me do this again. I want to thank you for your time. Let me put it on gallery view. And everyone, please, a big applause for Rich Hoffman and Peter Reali from the SCU. Gentlemen, thank you both very, very much. It has been a privilege and an honor to have you speak with us today. So
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, by all means, keep up doing the great work you're doing there.
thank you.